So for step 20, checking the RC equipment. The main reason you do this is to make sure that the servo is in neutral before you put everything together. And you can see that once we put that servo saver onto the servo, if for some reason it's not in the middle, this is all going to move after you've installed it, and you don't want that. So that is the whole point. So I've got my battery, I've got the speed controller, we've got our receiver, I've got the servo. What we need to do is plug all of this in and then do a test and make sure that the servo itself, if it'll focus there, is in neutral, and you'll see it move as when we plug it in. So I'm just going to attach everything, we'll do the test, and then we should be able to move on. Okay, so we're all plugged in. I've got everything ready to go, and the transmitter is on, and if you don't know, the steering is always number 1, and the speed controller goes into slot 2 on the receiver. But here's why we're here. There is our servo, and you can see the servo right there. I'm going to turn this on using this switch, and what you're looking for is whether that servo moves. So I'll flip it on and let's see what happens. Now you heard the sound, it did a little jiggle, and that means we know that it's exactly where it's supposed to be. Sometimes it can be off completely and it just completely resets, but for this one it's exactly where it needs to be. So if I turn it off and I turn it back on, it'll do a jiggle, and then we're back to neutral. So I can shut everything down, unplug everything, and we will then attach the servo saver to the servo, because now that we know that it's neutral, this is going to be okay putting it on. And you can see here they want that servo saver to be basically perpendicular to the horizontal, right, of the servo. So I'll just set this up and we'll screw that into the servo. So one of the other things to make note of is that when the servo came, it comes with this servo horn on it already. And the screw that is in there is a tapping screw. Well, you'll notice up here that they're showing you different options for the screw that you're going to use for the servo saver. And a lot of that has to do with the servo that you've got. Because in my case, with the Futaba servo, because it's a tapping screw, we've only got a choice of either the BA8 or the BA10. And the BA10 is the closest thing to what I have here. So if we look at the BA10 that comes in the bag, so the one on the left is what's going in, the one on the right is what came out of the servo. Now you'd also go, well, wait a minute, that screw is a lot longer than what came out of the servo. You don't need to worry about that, because there's so much extra room because of what we've done with this servo saver. So you can see that there's P1. So you need to grab that out of off of the parts tree. So if we slip that in there, and then we slip our screw in there, if you see that, there's not much of it sticking out. So when we grab our servo, and of course, actually I'll take that out for a minute, because what you're going to need to want to see, well, it doesn't matter if it's in there, is we need to have this perpendicular to the servo as was shown right here, right? So the thing is, because of the notches on the servo, same thing on the backside, it's not going to sit perfectly level. So you have a choice of either it sitting like that, or move it to the next closest, which is like that. And that seems better than that. It just seems farther away, right? So you have to make a choice. Now, the fine tuning can happen afterwards. We can do the adjustments with the radio in terms of getting it right. So I'm not worried about it, but what I do want to make sure is what's the best placement for that servo saver. And it does appear that that would be the best. I don't think it would make too much of a difference, but it just doesn't seem like it's quite as on an angle on the other, or on this one. So we're going to do this, and we will now screw it in. And I can feel that it's already starting to move the servo itself, but I'll just push, do a little bit more of a turn. Yep. So there we go. So yes, it's off to the side, but again, we're going to do fine-tuning adjustments to level it out so that it will then become completely perpendicular to the servo. So essentially, that step is done. So now we can move on to step 21, and we'll put together all the pieces that we need for the servo.